ॐ गणानां त्वा गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमम् ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पत आनः शृण्वन्नोतिभिः सीदसादनम् प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेभिर्वाजिनीवती धीनामवित्र्यवतु गणेशाय नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ यश्छन्दसां वृषभो विश्वरूपः छन्दोभ्योऽध्यमृतात् सम्बभूव समेन्द्रो मेधया स्पृणोतु अमृतस्य देवधारणो भूयासम् शरीरं मे विचर्षणम् जिह्वा मे मधुमत्तमा कर्णाभ्यां भूरिविश्रुवम् ब्रह्मणः कोशोऽसि मेधया पिहितः श्रुतं मे गोपाय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः मेधा देवी जुषमाणा न आगाद्विश्वाची भद्रा सुमनस्य माना त्वया जुष्टानुदमाना दुरुक्तान् बृहद्वदेम विदधे सुवीराः त्वया जुष्टऋषिर्भवति देवी त्वया ब्रह्मा गतश्रीरुतत्वया त्वया जुष्टश्चित्रं विन्दते वसुसानो जुषस्वत्र विनो न मेधे मेधां महीन्द्रो ददातु मेधां देवी सरस्वती मेधां मे अश्विनावुभावा धत्तां पुष्करस्रजा अप्सरासु च या मेधा गन्धर्वेषु च यन्मनः दैवीं मेधा सरस्वती सा मां मेधा सुरभिर्जुषत स्वाहा आमा मेधा सुरभिर्विश्वरूपा हिरण्यवर्णा जगति जगम्या ऊर्जस्वती पयसा बिन्वमाना सा मां मेधा सुप्रतीकाजुषन्ताम् मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मय्यग्निस्तेजो दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयीन्द्र इन्द्रियं दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि सूर्यो भ्राजो दधातु हंस हंसाय विद्महे परमहंसाय धीमहि तन्नो हंसः प्रचोदयात् ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वः प्रचोदयात् स्वस्ति प्रजाभ्यः परिपालयन्ताम् न्यायेन मार्गेण महीं महिषाः गोब्राह्मणेभ्यः शुभमस्तु नित्यम् समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः मे गोपाय
सहनावतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. I offer my most loving pranams at Bhagwan's lotus feet and seek his guidance and presence through this session. Loving Sairam and welcome to the monthly lecture series Gama Agama, episode 40, with the master topic Vedas, the foundation of Indian culture and spirituality, of Sri Sathya Sai Samyukta Shruti Shreni under the aegis of Sri Sathya Sai Seva Organizations, India. The clarion call given by Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba is that every individual should take a pledge to nourish the Vedas on the right lines. Bhagwan would vehemently remind us that Vedas are the welfare of the nation and the prosperity of the world, and they are the very foundation of life itself. And Bhagwan would say that education must make students understand the precious heritage of Indian culture and spirituality. With this inspiration, on the auspicious occasion of Guru Purnima in July 2020, a new chapter unfolded in the divine mission in the name of Sri Sathya Sai Samyukta Shruti Shreni, upholding the divine mission to foster Vedas and Vedic lore. The lecture series Gama Ãgama is an integral part of the above classes, and it helps us realize how Bhagwan wants us to harmonize the ancient culture with the needs of the modern world so that the youth are governed by Satya, Dharma, Shanti, Prema, and Ahimsa. During the Dashera of 1962, Bhagwan, in his clear, unmistakable way, told that his avatar mission encompasses Veda Samrakshana, Vidvat Poshana, and Dharma Sthapana. The Vedas are the basis of Dharma, Vidwans are the instruments, and Dharma alone is the panacea for the illness of mankind. Today, Bhagwan has blessed us with the presence of one such rare scholar and warrior of Dharma. Professor Subhash Kak is a polymath, a distinguished researcher, computer scientist, theoretical physicist, historian, Indologist, Vedic scholar, linguist, philosopher, and poet. Professor Kak is currently the Regents Professor in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. Born in Srinagar, Kashmir, he was educated at the IIT Delhi. His insatiable curiosity and relentless pursuit of knowledge propelled him to the forefront of cutting-edge research. Presently, his scholarly focus encompasses the realms of neural networks and quantum information, delving into the intricacies of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Professor Kak's multifaceted expertise extends beyond the realms of technology, as he has also made significant contributions in archaeoastronomy, the history of science, and the realm of art. A trailblazer in the field of quantum learning, Professor Kak is renowned for inventing INNs and a fast matrix multiplication algorithm for cross-wired meshes. But his work that ventures into the intricate relationship between language and brain behavior, proposing a taxonomy that sheds light on the profound connections between the two. Furthermore, he's also a prolific author. He has penned and co-authored over 20 books delving into diverse subjects, of which the most recent is the idea of India, Bharat as a civilization. Professor Kak's contributions have not gone unnoticed by his Janmabhoomi, Bharat. He currently serves as a member of the Indian Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovations Advisory Council, PM-STIAC, a testament to the recognition of his invaluable insights as well as the capacity of his ideas to shape the nation's policies. The nation honored him with the Padma Shri, the fourth highest civilian award in 2019, underlining the profound impact of his work on both a national and global scale. In essence, Professor Subhash Kak stands as a beacon of intellectual brilliance, weaving together the threads of science, philosophy, and art to illuminate the vast tapestry of human knowledge and Bharatiya Jnana Parampara. Dear Professor Kak, I'm honored by this opportunity to welcome and interact with you in this very special 40th edition of the Gama Agama lecture series. Welcome.
Sairam, thank you very much, Lalita ji. I'm really very fortunate to have this opportunity to speak to you about various things related to the mystery that is life and what we can do about it, and where Bharat and the Vedas stand for not just Bharat, but the entire globe at this point in history. Yeah.
Yes, as someone coming from humanities, I'm fascinated by how, with such ease, you straddle both the worlds of spirituality and science, humanities as well as technology. Could you please share insights into how do you navigate these two realms in your research as well as in your personal philosophy?
Well, the story as far as my own research in humanities is concerned, or history of Bharatiya knowledge is concerned, it goes back to mid-80s. I was working on AI, on the problem of machine translation. And then I remembered when I was a kid, my father used to tell me that there is this amazing grammar in Sanskrit by Panini, which represented the entire language in where all constructions in Sanskrit could be made using only 4,000 algebraic rules. And this fascinated me because, of course, I was generally well informed about India's history, and I had been connected to India's spirituality as well, because my father, before he got married, he had been an apprentice yogi and he had wanted to become a sadhu. But then finally his guru said, after having spent 2 years with the guru, his guru said, no, I want you to get married and have children, etc., etc. But he had all those samskaras with him. So I did grow up in that atmosphere. So I was very well informed. But then I was sort of shocked when I examined narratives on Panini's grammar, Ashtadhyayi. History books said that there was no writing in India at that time, and there was no science in India at that time, and sciences were brought to India, and writing was brought to India after Alexander. Now, this was problematic because Ashtadhyayi is also now seen as a forerunner to the entire discipline of computer science, because the 4,000 algebraic rules not only have rules, but they also have rules about rules, which is what you have in a computer programming language. So, and 4,000, how could one, without knowledge of writing, have conceived of them and kept them logically connected? So what I then asked myself, I said, okay, here I am. This is the world's greatest mystery. Let me investigate. So what I did was I systematically went back to the various layers of Sanskrit literature. You know, you have the Puranas, then you have the Sutras, then you have the Aranyakas, then you have the Brahmanas, and then finally the Vedic texts. So I went back and I said, let me see, are the standard historical accounts correct? And then what I discovered was, especially studying the Shatapatha Brahmana, I discovered that the way the ritual, the great ritual, Agni Chayan ritual was conducted, had an astronomical basis to it, which had been completely missed by all the scholars, the Western as well as Indian, because they were only focusing on the ritual. And from there, I discovered that there was an astronomy which had been forgotten. And this astronomy was very, very interesting. And one of the key things about this astronomy was that the Vedic rishis were aware that the sun and the moon are each 108 times their respective diameter from the earth. And modern astronomy has also shown that the diameter of the sun itself is about 108 times the diameter of the earth. And this was then encapsulated in a lot of stuff in the plan of the temple. And of course, we do know that we have 108 beats in the Japamala, because you're making a symbolic journey from the earth, which is your body, through the pranas, which is the atmosphere, to the inner sun, who is the deity, whether you want to call him Vishnu or Shiva or the goddess. So you're making a symbolic journey. And not only that, this is also expressed, as we know, in 108 tirthasthanas, right? Or 108 names of the god or the goddess, or 107 marmasthanas in Ayurveda. Because if you take 108 things, there will be 107 meeting points, right? If you have two things, there's one meeting point. There are 108 things, 107 meeting points. So the body itself was viewed as a construction, as a sacred construction with 108 elements, and therefore you have 107 marmasthanas. So I did this, and of course I also worked on the script and on the Indus script, and I wrote several papers showing that the Brahmi script, which is the historical script in Bharat, was or is related very fundamentally, structurally, to the so-called Indus script, which some people also call the Saraswati script, which goes back at least 2500 BCE, which is 4500 years from now, prior to our time, and maybe earlier. So
would you say that it is related to the Proto-Indo-European language?
Okay, now that's an interesting question. What about the relationship between Indian languages and European language? Now, that is the other very, very big elephant in the room, which has had an impact on India's understanding of its own ancient history, because the Europeans came, they said, well, okay, this is what your history is. And it's been a fight. That colonial view, India has been fighting that view, because if you look at people like Aurobindo, they said, this doesn't make sense. But of course, academic Indologists have not necessarily paid attention to what sages, modern sages, have said about what our understanding of history is. And there is another element, you know, the whole caste thing. When the British did the census, you know, all the jatis believe that they were equal to every other jati. The relationship between jati and varna was not frozen. You know, varna is a separate thing. Varna is a separate thing.
It's almost an instrument of pedagogy in the sense of knowledge transmission.
Absolutely. So in the 1901 census, when the British sent their census takers to different parts of India, they asked people, the protagonists or the speakers for various jatis, they said, what varna are you in? They said, there's no varna, we are a jati, and sometimes we have our own priests and so on. But the British said, no, we are going to put you in this varna hierarchy. And then later on, there's a very famous quote by the chief census taker, the British guy. He said, this is about 1910s or 1920s, and I quote this in my book, The Idea of India. And he said, you know, we decry the caste system, but we are the ones, we meaning the British, we are the ones who have created it. So now, the other idea of Indo-European languages, also the British said, or going back to Max Muller and others, they said, look, we are ruling India, so that's because we are better. That's because even though the languages of Europe and India are connected, but India has sort of become genetically weak, because initial impulse in India also came from Europe, because their understanding was that Europe was the source of Indo-European languages, and the Indo-Europeans came to India about 1500 BCE, etc., etc. But all of that has fallen apart, because their compulsion or their insistence on 1500 BCE originally was because of the Christian chronology, that the whole earth was created, or universe was created by God in 4004 BCE. They could not understand all these huge time periods within the Indian tradition. You know, you have millions or billions of years that you have these kalpas and this and that, and also we must not forget that all of Indian languages, according to linguists, including South Indian and North Indian languages, it's a linguistic area where there's a tremendous relationship. There's a closer relationship between North and South Indian languages than North Indian languages and European languages, right? And now, what's most interesting is this original homeland, so to speak, of Indo-European people. Its identification has sort of moved with global power of countries. 19th century, when Europe was very powerful, and Germany was very rich, at that time, the German Indology said Germany was the original homeland. And as Russia rose in the 20th century, and then they said, okay, maybe the Russian steppes were the homeland. Now, in a paper very recently, just 3 or 4 months ago in Science, which is a very respected journal, which comes out from the US, there is now a paper which argues for the first time for Western scholars to say that it was south of the Caucasus Mountains, close in Iran, which is just next door to India. Now, of course, what Indian scholars have always been saying is that if you look at all the evidence, you look at the Nadi Suktam of the Rig Veda. The Nadi Suktam of the Rig Veda says that Saraswati is Nadi Tama. It's the greatest river. Giribhya a Samudrat, which goes from the mountain to the sea, right? But archaeologists have discovered that Saraswati stopped going to the sea about 300 BCE. And the Indus civilization, and one proof of that is the Indus civilization settlements, which are where the greatest phase is, say, 2500 BCE to 1900 BCE. All those settlements are primarily, most of them are on the Saraswati valleys through Rajasthan and so on, but they stop in Bahawalpur. And Bahawalpur is just beyond Rajasthan. So why did they stop? Clearly, the river had already stopped going to the sea. Otherwise, the settlements and towns and villages would have continued all the way to the sea, right? So all of this and many others, and I wrote this up in the 1990s, not 1900s, in a book called The Astronomical Code of the Rig Veda, where all of these issues came up. And then with 2 American scholars, we wrote a book which became a huge bestseller in the world, which was a first challenge to the old orthodoxy, called In Cradle of the Civilization, in Search of the Cradle of Civilization, with my colleagues, the great yoga scholar named Georg Feuerstein, who's now passed away, and David Frawley, who's also a Vedic scholar who lives in the USA. So in other words, this journey was triggered by this question about Ashtadhyayi and Panini, and took me over various stages. And then, as to your question, how does one straddle these 2 worlds? This idea of these 2 worlds being apart is a European one. You know, C.P. Snow wrote that famous book on this, right? That these 2 worlds are always apart. But in reality, the Bharatiya tradition is that, well, there is one reality which is all united. It doesn't really matter, but you know, what is the difference between science and the arts? The deepest science, there are 2 aspects to science. One is mechanical, you know, you do math, calculations. The other is the intuition behind what you do. That intuition is no different from the intuition that you have in history or in poetry or in the arts. So really, the Bharatiya way of looking at reality is in a unified way, because everything is unified by this one, which is consciousness, which is Atman. There's only one Atman, right? And then its manifestation. From this one come the many.
Yes.
From unity you have
Wonderful.
multiplicity, and this multiplicity corresponds in intellectual world to the many different disciplines.
How do you foresee this movement shaping future? How do you foresee Vedic wisdom shaping future, especially in the creation of a world that is more rooted and based on human values?
Well, the world is facing an unprecedented crisis right now. And the origins of that crisis, if you look at it from the Western perspective, here I'm sitting in the United States and looking at how society in America has hollowed out, especially in the last 20 or 30 years. America can't even produce its own workers in the scientific fields. If you look at American companies, go to Silicon Valley, New York, finance, or IT, you'll find Indians and Chinese. Why? American schools cannot produce them. Why? American education system cannot inspire its own youth to work, to look inside and aspire. And of course, for that, you need commitment. It can't do it. Why? Now, of course, the question is why? Because the West also had a great tradition of sciences and great achievements after the scientific revolution, which occurred, say, 300 years ago. And the reason is, in the last 40, 50 years, America and the West has turned its back on its own spiritual tradition. For example, the whole idea of divinity in all. The West, of course, they were both currents. They were the narrow current in the West, which talked about domination and colonialism and so on, and taking advantage of other cultures, as sadly happened in India. As we know, India's share of the world economy during the 120 years, from 1800, when the British became powerful in India, India's share of the world economy was about 22%. By 1918, it had dropped to less than 2%. And as I mentioned the other day in some interview, it happened not because the British were going about beheading people, but their policies. They crushed India's arts and crafts, India's own production, didn't make any investment in factories while Industrial Revolution had taken off in the UK and in Europe. And what that did was a lot of the things that we think were always bad in India, like interjati atyachar, if you will. And there was some, let's not forget it. That's because all the jatis were impoverished so much. According to estimates, about 100 million people died in British-caused famines in India. So this is one side, right? So that was the bad side. But there was also good side. There were great sages, Western sages, who talked about unity, science, and science made advances. But in the last 50 years, in the West has turned its back on that thread of unity. And why did it do that? Because the West started insisting, because of the success of the computer model, that we are nothing but machines. Humans are also nothing but machines. See, originally, there is the spirit. Even in Western tradition, people used to talk about the spirit, right? There is the spirit,
yes,
and we must do things for the spirit. The whole thing about spiritual seeking comes from that
yes,
phrase. But now, everything is about sensation, about the body. And
right.
which is why the West has now fallen into this strange thing about, okay, we don't even know. There are probably 52 genders. The kids go to colleges now and they have to tick off one of these signs. Are you male or female, or 50 genders in between? There is this madness, and people don't even recognize that there's this madness. And my whole thing is that such madness does come upon societies, and it has happened in the past also. For example, you look at China. For several centuries, they had this tradition of foot binding. They would take these girls and they would bind their feet. So they would basically mutilate the feet just because they thought that small feet was a good thing. And nobody questioned it. Likewise, right now, certain attitudes in the West, which are to be found even in the best universities, are so crazy that, and in the West, they don't have the tradition. Of course, there's a pushback starting. They don't have the capacity right now, or they're not in a position to completely get back to something which makes sense. And that's where Bharat comes in. Because what the Vedas talk about is, Vedas say there are two aspects to reality. There is the outer reality, there is the inner reality. And these are like two sides of a coin. The
Right.
outer, the Bahaya, and the Antare. The
Yes.
Atman is inside, and the Atman is the source. The West has to embrace the Atman back. And this is also the frontier of science, because in science, they cannot explain the observer. You know, if everything is mechanical, where does the observer, where does consciousness come in? The frontier of science is consciousness, and whether you look at it from the perspective of physics or neuroscience or even computers, because if consciousness is mechanical, then you should be able to make computers which are conscious. And just imagine, if computers could be conscious, then they would kill off all life, because they wouldn't need pesky little creatures like human beings, right? They would just kill them off. But in reality, computers will never become conscious, because computers are mechanical toys, and they do things which are well defined. And of course, a lot of what human beings also do is mechanical. And so what is the crisis? The crisis is more and more jobs will disappear, and therefore societies will have to confront this whole question of the meaning of life. And as jobs disappear, people either will, well, there'll also be wars, etc., as is happening in Ukraine or the Middle East, but the populations will shrink because they are not, and that is also happening. You know, in Korea right now, the fertility rate has dropped to 0.71 when you need 2.1 for population replacement. India also, it's close to 2.1, right? In Europe, it's about 1.3. So the populations eventually will collapse. And if there are no jobs, because jobs which require mental work will be done by computers, right? Computers can do judgment. Jobs which require physical work will be done by robots, as is already happening. The whole question will be, what is the meaning of life? And that meaning is provided by the Vedas. The Vedas speak of the Atman as the source, and I am Atma Brahma, for example. This is what also was responsible, this Mahavakya, was responsible for the birth of quantum mechanics. All of modern sciences are based on quantum mechanics. The creator of quantum mechanics was an Austrian Vedantin named Erwin Schrödinger. And in his autobiography, he says that the central idea of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma. Or, you know, Prajnanam Brahma. Or Neti Neti. What does it really mean? That Atman is beyond words, beyond language. It can be only experienced. Or Aham Brahmasmi. What does it really mean? That this Atman within you and I and everybody else has the capacity to comprehend the entire cosmos, because the entire cosmos is mirrored in the Atman. The whole Brahmand and this Pind, our mind, is a mirror of each other. And all of this is really the answer not only to the individual's questions about their meaning, but also questions about, you know, the meaning for entire society. How do you live life, and how do you make it happy and purposeful for everybody? And in this, and we should not forget, what the Vedas also tell is that every human being, in fact, every prani is equal, because within, no matter what jati you come from, within each prani, within each human being, as the Purusha Suktam tells us, is the same Purusha. And Purush is the Atman, another name for the Atman. Every person has the same Purush. And from that Purush emerge the various varnas within each person. Therefore, each person has the capacity to do whatever they want to do.
True, very true. So, if I may say, you're saying how the Indian thought, the Bharatiya Darshana, helps us address the Pratibhasika existence, the Vyavaharika existence, but also reminds us of the Paramarthika Satta that exists, which the West and the Western mindset, as you are pointing out, has forgotten. So yes, we need, of course, we need the Vedic wisdom to guide us in our as we foray into the future. I have one question to ask regarding especially your scholarship in Sanskrit and Vedic studies. How do you approach the interpretation of the Vedas? Do you see them as allegorical, literal, or a combination of both?
Well, depends upon what exactly you're looking at. For example, if you're looking at in the idea of India, I have a few shorter suktams which I translated, but it depends what literature you're looking at. If you're looking at the Samhitas, there it is, much more complicated because you have all this terms, the devas. The devatas are the powers within us. And I can give you a scientific background to it.
Please.
A person can get a stroke or an injury to the brain. And after that, a person can lose the capacity to read. And this is called alexia. And everything else is fine. The eyesight is fine. The person can do everything. The only thing they forget or are incapable of doing is to read. And so if you show them the letter A, and they'll see, okay, this is the letter A. But then when you show it to them again, they cannot read it. They cannot recognize what it is. So clearly a certain brain center, which you can call a devata, which has the capacity to learn, has been damaged, right? But what's interesting is that some of these people can still write, so long as they don't look at the paper.
Oh, that's amazing.
And this is called alexia without agraphia.
Right.
So our mind, our manas, is a hierarchical system, is a system where there are agents under the mind. Now, I'm using modern neuroscientific terminology, right? You have agents or modules which do various things. Now, of course, a naive objection to all of this could be that, well, if the brain is a computer, then you are only storing information or processing information, right? But that's not what it is, because the Vedic idea of the mind, and this brings us back to the whole question of in hermeneutics or understanding of the Vedic literature. The Vedic literature of the mind, as we know, the 5 koshas. You have the Annamaya kosha, which is our body, the physical body. Above that is the Pranamaya kosha, which are the various processes going on inside the body. Above that is the Manomaya kosha. So the mind sits at the level above the pranas, right? And what does the manas do? Manas has memories and processes, although we don't always have access to all our memories. Sometimes you can't recall a name. You don't know where their name is stored. And then suddenly it comes from somewhere. But above that, which is where Western psychology and Western understanding of reality falls short, above the Manomaya kosha is the Vijnanamaya kosha. And above the Vijnanamaya kosha, which is where the intellect is, where the buddhi is, right? And above buddhi or the Vijnanamaya kosha is the Anandamaya kosha. And Anandamaya kosha is where your ego is, your ahankar is. You have the great stotram by Adi Shankaracharya. Mano buddhi ahankara chittani naham, right?
Yes.
Right. So chitta, of course, is the memories. Manas, buddhi, ahankar is the higher level. And ahankar is something which you cannot turn your gaze back on and find out who you really are. Because part of that is inherited. You're born with certain tendencies, your personalities, and part of it becomes you, the way you're raised. Which is why the Vedic view is not only talking of individuals as black boxes, which is the Western view, and that's where they are failing. because you have to, it's like a flower that you have to properly nurture, right?
Yes.
If you don't properly nurture it, you will not get the individual that you want. So in any event, you know, you have to look at all these stages, and that's where and the interpretation, I should also further add that you have, we, all of us have 4 different states of awareness, you know, the Jagrat, and the Swapna, Sushupti, and Turiya, right? Now,
Yes,
in the Swapna Avastha, what in the Jagrat Avastha, whatever we see, there is a certain structure to it. And we understand it. You know, we compare notes. We say this is what the word is. But why does our consciousness work so differently in the Swapna Avastha? We can even fly there. What is it? What is that going on? And of course, in Mandukya Upanishad, we are told what it is, or in the other Upanishads, that there is divinity operates through us in different ways, and you have creativity accessible to you in your Swapnavastha through what is called Hiranyagarbha. The Hiranyagarbha, the womb of that golden light, right? And all of this is a whole new world, which the Western psychology doesn't know.
To you, sir. Yes, absolute treat to listen to you refer to Gaudapada Karika and Mandukya Upanishad and trace Bhavana out of it. This is wonderful. Your Kashmiri Abhinava Gupta would be greatly proud of this connection you're making in this regard, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So what's beautiful is that this is indeed, it opens up capacities which cannot be explained by the West. The West is falling short because its understanding falls short. So the West doesn't know where to go. They say everybody think they devalue culture. They are going to impose their woke values, which says that you are nothing but your body and sensations. And that will only lead to hopelessness. You know, in the United States last year, 120,000 young people died of fentanyl overdose. Why are people dying? In 10 years of Vietnam War, only 53,000 people died. Every year, more than 100,000 people in America are dying. And these are young people with children, young children. But they have been told when they're young, you're nothing but your body, you're nothing but your body. And they have a emptiness within them. And they go to drugs to fill that emptiness with something.
Right.
And then sometimes you get a batch of drugs. They're not necessarily trying to kill themselves because this is the underworld. Some of these drugs are contaminated. They get a bad batch. They take it and they die. So, but what does it point to? It points to, you know, a tremendous problem right now in the world. And sadly, perhaps in the big cities in India as well, people are looking up to Hollywood. Bollywood has become an image of Hollywood. There is probably emptiness even in Mumbai, and people who follow that. So I think this is this big dharma yuddha, you know, dharma kshetra right now in India. India will show the way to the world because that light, you know, you talked about Kashmir Shaivism or Abhinav Gupta. Another name for Atman in Kashmir was Prakash. Shiva is also called Prakash. And it's that light which illuminates everything. And you know, that really makes sense because if you were to think of it, there's no light inside the head. Head is all dark inside. The brain is all dark. How do we see? There is a light of the Atman or Shiva, right? You might want to call Shiva. If you want to use both I see Vedanta, whether you look at Shankaracharya's Vedanta or classical Vedanta or Kashmir Shaivism Vedanta at the same, you know, because I am Atman and Brahman are the same. It's that light. Now, of course, what Kashmir Shaivism or Abhinav Gupta stress is that Paramashiva is also, there is, you can relate to it. Paramashiva can provide you that guidance that Brahman is not just impersonal. Paramashiva is personal. Or you can use Krishna or Vasudeva or Shakti or whatever name for the deity, because they are ultimately the same beyond words. And I think it's all beautiful. It's so extraordinary. I can't tell you. And this extraordinary understanding then guides you through your life and provides you the various gifts that there are, because every human being's life should be or is supposed to be a life of chamatkar and wonderment and fulfillment. And if it is not so, that's because we need to do sadhana. And of course, there's some tapas required, there's some udyam required, and that's when chamatkar happens. For example, Srinivas Ramanujan, he would wake up and he would say, Goddess Namagiri, that was their family deity, gives him all those formulae, which people are still working on. Where did this come from? Where does creativity come from? It comes from within, because a computer cannot be creative. Ultimately, we are not machines. We have to get connected back to the Atma within us. And that is what Bharat's destiny, that's what we are here for. Or goddess working through us.
Given this vast experience in multiple disciplines, where do you see the trajectory of Indic wisdom heading in years and decades to come?
Ultimately, truth can be only one. Sometimes, you have these experts sitting in universities of the West or maybe India in their own disciplines, and they know a lot, but their understanding is very little. Right? Because understanding in a discipline is only domain knowledge. This truth is which comes from the Atman within us, that Prakash within us. And India will show its way by focusing, by putting the spotlight, so to speak, on this thing which is missing in the West. And in the West, there are people who are searching for it and who have gotten connected to it. In fact, I came across a certain Vedic community in Hungary, where these Hungarians have created a village where they live according to Vedic precepts, and their whole community, social, the way they eat, the way they dress, and you can Google it. So people are doing it, and India was an incredible place, as we know from the accounts that we have of travelers like Faihan or Huanzang, who wrote, during the time of Harshvardhan, for example, who said that there's almost no crime, there's wonderful stuff, and just look at the monuments that have come down in India, the great temples. There's nothing like that anywhere in the world. And then you had these yogis and other travelers from India who went to Southeast Asia, all the way up to Japan, and not only from there, also through the Himalayas, which some of which I write about in the book, The Idea of India, and went both eastwards to China and Mongolia, but also westward to the European world. And as we know, the original deity of the Slavic world, which is all the East Europeans and the Russians, the Ukrainians and the Czechs, etc., they became Christian only 1,000 years ago, was a deity named Shvetavid. They called it Shvetavid, with 4 faces, just like Shiva's 4 faces. Shiva can be seen in 5 faces or 4 faces or 3 faces, depending upon what is that you're focusing on. And it had 4 faces, and the names were Svarga, Moksha, Parjanya, and Ladha, even Sanskrit words. Incredible. So I think the time has come also for Europe to wake up to its own past. And that past will take Europe also to the source, which is what Bharat is. Bharat, Bha meaning wisdom, Rat meaning absorbed. People who are absorbed in wisdom, in light.
Right.
Bha also means light. Bharatam. Yes.
As you were mentioning about these Indic Renaissance that's happening in European countries, what came to my mind is I had the fortune of being Bhagwan's student at the Sri Sati Sai Institute of Higher Learning through my entire higher education. And one of my fondest memories of is watching Sai devotees from Russia, from Iran, from Japan, from the Middle East coming and sitting down in Bhagwan's divine physical presence and reciting Sri Rudram and Narayana Suktam and Purusha Suktam. Since time is short, I have just one major question to ask you before we wind up. What advice do you have for young Vedic learners across various professions who may be interested in integrating traditional knowledge with modern disciplines? Now we are seeing this first flush of Indian knowledge systems all over the country, and given the interdisciplinary nature of the subject, how do you see potential for collaboration between experts in scientific community with traditional scholars who are well versed in Vedic knowledge?
Well, I think individual scholars will have to find that convergence. You can't necessarily speak with everybody with traditional knowledge for help in your own work. See, for example, I can tell you from a personal perspective, what has been very helpful to me was my translation of Kannada's Vaisheshika Sutras.
Right.
Because that opened my eyes. I wrote a book on it in 2016.
But sir, sorry to interrupt. That's also because you are fortunately well versed in Sanskrit, whereas many of our young scholars may not know this rich storehouse that Sanskrit as a language is.
So I think, first of all, everybody should, we have to be dedicated. Without dedication and sadhana, or without effort, the gifts, the goddess will not, goddess is within us, Saraswati is within us. Goddess wants you to show that you're really devoted. So you must, Sanskritam as this language which is well created, it's the language of the gods, so to speak. So once you dedicate yourself to it, it starts yielding gifts to you.
Right.
And so people must devote some effort. There is Sanskrit Bharati, for example. You can learn, fun, simple conversation. But effort slowly. You don't have to get away from all your work. Do whatever you're doing, but at least devote a few minutes a day. And but let me complete the story about Kannada's Vaisheshik Sutra. What had happened was that there was a young lady from Bengaluru who was visiting the US with her husband and daughter. She wanted to do some work on Indian sciences. This is many years ago. So I said, why don't you do Vaisheshik Sutras? And she did some. And I was, as a professor, professors normally don't pay too much of attention to what their students are doing. And I didn't pay too much of attention, and she wrote some papers on it. But then an editor in India, in Delhi, who was doing a series of books on history of Indian sciences and civilization, he says, can you write a chapter on Indian physics? So I had some knowledge. So I went to Kannada's and I translated that. And I was astonished. Kannada's Vaisheshik Sutras, about 2,500 years ago, has 3 sutras which are almost identical to Newton's laws of motion. Why don't we know it? Right. And it has other stuff, and it has something which probably was absolutely revolutionary. For example, it says that Dik and Kal, direction and space and direction and time. Dik is direction, Kal, time. The way we experience that is created by the mind. You have mind and consciousness. Mind is mechanical. Mind is light falling on Prakriti within us, right? But Atman is beyond it. So reality, since Dik and Kal are created by the mind, the idea came to me 2 or 3 years ago, maybe how we take space to be 3-dimensional is not right, because optimally 2.718 is optimal in terms of logic. 3 is not. So I just ran with this. So I wrote up a whole series of papers, and you can Google it, our E-dimensional universe. And it solves some of the deepest problems of modern physics, of dark matter and dark energy, for which there is no evidence. 96% of the universe is supposed to be dark matter and dark energy. If you assume that space is E-dimensional, then that problem goes away. And many other things come out of it. So this is just a small example. Let's go back to the Shastras, go back to the Vedas, and approach it with humility and devotion, and the goddess shall provide us some flowers, which will be beautiful.
So there is the sadhana and tapas is the only way out, is what you're telling us. And that learning Sanskrit and going to the text in original is indispensable in this path.
Absolutely, and it's also enjoyable. Look at the stotras; they are beautiful. Music, Sangeet is so beautiful. There is this English woman, Gaia Sanskrit. She has some wonderful things on YouTube. It's all it's a thing of beauty. We are not just doing it because it's to be done, something difficult to be done, which you don't even have your heart in. Just let's approach it with humility and see the beauty in it. Ultimately, you know, the goddess shows you the way through beauty. You know, why do we celebrate beauty? It's like I wrote a little haiku on it, and this is what it is. Autumn moon alone, the heaving pond. Autumn moon is a source of beauty. It's alone. We can't even reach it. But we are the water. Our mind is the water. And what does the water do? The attraction of the moon, it makes the water go up, rise up. Yes. So if we devote ourselves to beauty of different kinds, of sangeet, of art, nritya, natya, whatever, and they are the doorways. The kalas are the doorways, right? If we dedicate ourselves, and that's when there is a chamatkar that occurs. You know, chamatkar. In Kashmir Shaivism, that's one of the central things that are repeated again and again. Shiva works through chamatkar. Right. And then suddenly, and of course, use English terminology, you can say epiphany. And epiphany occurs. And suddenly one day you're transformed. And that's what yajna actually is. Yajna is a place where you become transformed, where you are not, after you've gone through it, the Yajaman, after the Yajaman has gone through it, he ceases to be the person who he was before, and he's reborn. You know, Janmam takes place at that Yajna, and that Yajna takes place all through one's life. It's not just at the end of one's life. The life itself is a series of transformations. If we do that, then I can assure you and assure your listeners that life is a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much, sir. This was so beautiful, so profound. I'm immensely grateful to you for taking us, all of us, through this very enlightening journey for the past 40 minutes or so. I wish you could speak more, but thank you so much that you took time to spend with us despite your very busy schedule, and shared such valuable insights on so many areas, so many complex areas where the solution actually lies in Vedic wisdom. We are very grateful on behalf of Sat Sai organizations, India, Sri Sathya Sai Samyukta Shruti Shreni. I want to thank you for taking this time and spending this 1 hour or so with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Grateful.
Om Jai Jagadish Hare Swami Satya Sai Hare Bhakta Jana Samrakshak Bhakta Jana Samrakshak Pati Maheshwara Om Jai Jagadish Hare Shashivadana Shrikara साई महादेवा मंगल आरती अंधुको मंगल आरती अंधुको मंदर गिरिधारी ओम जय जगदीश हरे नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण 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 ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण 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 ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण 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 ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा शांति 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 समस्त लोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्त लोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्त लोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु शांति 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 जय बोलो भगवान श्री सत्य साई बाबा जी की जय।